The silence of night shifts had always been my sanctuary. Driving for Lyft during those desolate hours when the city sleeps meant emptier roads, better tips, and the comforting solitude I craved. But that false sense of security, how foolish I was. I've weathered my share of strange encounters, drunks, lovers quarreling, the occasional eccentric. But nothing, absolutely nothing could have prepared me for what transpired on that fateful night. A night that would permanently etch itself into my psyche, leaving me forever changed. My beat-up 2005 Volvo, with its familiar creaks and groans, had become almost an extension of myself. The streets lay hauntingly empty before me, streetlights casting eerie, elongated shadows across the pavement. It was precisely 2:47 a.m. when the notification pinged, breaking the hypnotic hum of tires against asphalt. A convenience store pickup. Innocent enough. Yet something visceral and primal stirred in my gut. That ancestral warning system we've all felt but rarely heed. You know that feeling? When your subconscious screams danger before your conscious mind can process why. That dread was pulsing through me, growing stronger with each passing moment. As I approached, the source of my unease became painfully obvious. The convenience store stood in complete darkness. Closed, abandoned, lifeless. Not a single light flickered within its darkened windows. Not a single car occupied its deserted lot. And then, I saw him. He lurked outside the shuttered entrance, his body in constant, unnatural motion. His ratty hoodie, torn and filthy, hung from his gaunt frame like a second skin that hadn't been shed in years. The sleeve bore a jagged hole, revealing pale, twitching flesh beneath. His movements were erratic, mechanical, as though his body operated on frayed wiring instead of muscle and sinew. His head snapped in constant vigilance, eyes darting wildly as if invisible predators circled him. My finger hovered over the cancellation button, my last chance at salvation. A moment of hesitation that would haunt me for months to come. Instead, with inexplicable disregard for my own safety, I unlocked the doors. He slid into my back seat with the fluid grace of a predator, bringing with him the acrid stench of stale cigarettes and something else. Something rotten. The atmosphere in my car shifted instantly, becoming thick, oppressive. I could feel his presence behind me like a physical weight pressing against my spine. Most passengers lose themselves in their phones or gaze blankly out windows, but not him. He just stared, unblinking, unmoving. His reflection in my rearview mirror revealed eyes that didn't look through me, but into me, as if peeling back layers of my consciousness. Something sinister lurked behind those bloodshot eyes, something hungry. His face was locked in an expression of subdued rage, like a predator forced to wait before the kill. I switched on the radio, desperate to break the suffocating silence. The moment music filled the car, his voice slashed through it, deep, gravelly, and commanding. "Turn it off!" Each syllable scraped against my ears like jagged metal. I obeyed, my knuckles whitening as I gripped the wheel, my lifeline in this mobile nightmare. We drove in a silence more deafening than any scream could ever be. Then, without warning, he shattered it. Ever pick up someone you shouldn't have? The question hit me like a physical blow. A nervous laugh escaped my lips, pathetic and transparent. Well, I hope not. He leaned back, muttering something unintelligible beneath his breath, then launched into a rambling story about his days as an Uber driver. How he quit after some punks took things from his car. His words slurred and tripped over each other. But what disturbed me most was his expression. He smiled. Not a smile of reminiscence or humor, but a twisted, malevolent grin that never reached his eyes, like a mask poorly affixed to his face. "It's funny how much trust you put in someone sitting right behind you." Those words turned my blood to ice. In that moment, he transformed from eccentric to threat. My pulse thundered in my ears as perspiration beaded along my hairline. I fixated on the GPS with desperate intensity, clinging to the promise of eventual escape. Yet he continued, his manic monologue, veering between coherent threats and nonsensical babbling. Then came the chilling shift. He began apologizing, not to me, but to some invisible presence. "I didn't mean it," he repeated with frantic urgency. "I didn't mean it." What hadn't he meant? What had he done? My imagination conjured horrific possibilities as we drove through the empty city streets. Suddenly, he erupted in rage, accusing me of missing a turn. The GPS clearly showed we were en route, but fear compelled me to slam the brakes anyway. He demanded I pull over, his voice laced with something feral and dangerous. With trembling hands, I complied. As if summoned by some divine intervention, headlights appeared behind us. A police cruiser. The man in my back seat flattened himself across the seat, becoming nearly invisible. I watched, heart pounding in my throat, as the cruiser's spotlight swept briefly over my vehicle before continuing its patrol. He remained unnaturally still until the police had disappeared completely. Then, with measured movements, he lifted his head and whispered words that still haunt my dreams. "You got lucky." Before I could respond, he was gone, vanishing into the darkness as though he'd never existed at all. It wasn't until weeks later that I discovered the horrifying truth. A news article described a convenience store robbery, just 2 blocks from where I'd picked him up. The realization hit me with sickening clarity. I had been alone in my car with a violent criminal, separated only by inches and chance from becoming another statistic. I still drive sometimes, but I'm never truly alone anymore. The memory of those unblinking eyes watching me through the rearview mirror has become my constant companion. And sometimes, when I glance into that mirror, I swear I can still see him sitting there, waiting. The guardian of the woods. I fled to the wilderness seeking silence. After the incident in the city, the one I still can't bring myself to detail, even the faintest sound became excruciating. My psychiatrist called it phonophobia, but clinical terms do little to describe the visceral, stabbing pain that ordinary noises inflicted upon me. It was as if my nervous system had been rewired, every cell screaming at the slightest provocation, each car horn, slamming door, or raised voice sending lightning bolts of agony through my entire being. You don't understand true suffering until something as mundane as the hum of a refrigerator feels like needles being driven into your eardrums, until the sound of raindrops against a window transforms from soothing to torturous. I lived in a perpetual state of terror, never knowing when the next auditory assault would strike. My apartment became a fortress of sound-dampening materials. Foam panels on walls, heavy drapes over windows, weather stripping around doors. But it wasn't enough. The city's relentless cacophony found ways to penetrate every barrier. I lost my job, my friends, my connection to the world outside my increasingly claustrophobic sanctuary. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by a constant state of hypervigilance. My body was constantly tensed, bracing for the next sound that would send that horrible, tingling sensation cascading through my chest. It felt like my heart was perpetually on the verge of exploding, my lungs constantly forgetting how to function. The breaking point came during a particularly bad thunderstorm. The crashes of thunder were so intense that I found myself curled in a corner of my bathroom, hands pressed against my ears so hard that my skull ached, screaming to drown out the sound with my own voice. A painful irony that was lost on me in the moment. That night, I knew I had to escape or die trying. Oregon's ancient forests seemed like salvation. Isolated, remote, forgotten. It was listed on an obscure real estate website, the kind that specializes in properties for people who want to disappear. The lack of cellular reception was a blessing, not an inconvenience. The nearest town was a 40-minute drive away. What sold me completely, though, was the profound silence. A silence so pure and complete, it was almost tangible, like a physical presence enveloping me in its protective embrace. I remember the day I arrived, stepping out of my car after the long drive up winding dirt roads. The silence hit me like a physical force, not the absence of sound, but a presence all its own. The soft whisper of wind through pine needles, the distant call of a bird, the gentle rustling of leaves. These weren't noises, but rather components of the silence itself, natural and harmonious in a way city sounds could never be. For the first time in months, I took a deep breath that didn't hurt. My new sanctuary was modest but sturdy. Weathered timber beams that had withstood decades of punishing winters, a stone fireplace that radiated ancient warmth, and windows that framed the endless sea of towering pines. The air inside carried that distinctive scent of earth and aged paper, a primal aroma that somehow felt like coming home. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, but the sound was somehow comforting rather than jarring. I spent that first day just walking through the rooms, running my fingers along the rough-hewn wooden walls, feeling the history embedded in their grain. The previous owner had left most of the furniture, simple, rustic pieces that looked handcrafted rather than mass-produced. A rocking chair by the fireplace, a heavy oak table in the kitchen, a bed frame with intricate carvings of forest scenes. For the first time in months, the relentless tingling in my chest, that perpetual fight-or-flight response that had become my constant companion, began to subside. I could breathe again. I could exist without bracing for the next assault on my senses. That first night, I slept for 14 straight hours, lulled by the gentle symphony of the forest and the absolute absence of human-generated noise. I quickly settled into a routine. Mornings spent working on my laptop. I was fortunate that my skills, as a graphic designer, allowed remote work. Afternoons exploring the immediate surroundings of my cabin, carefully mapping the area so I wouldn't get lost in the labyrinthine woods. Evenings by the fireplace, reading by lamplight, or simply sitting in blissful silence, reacquainting myself with the sound of my own thoughts. My nearest neighbor, I was told by the real estate agent, lived a 10-minute walk down a narrow, winding trail. Though in reality, with the midnight call, the drive between our family's homes has become more than just a journey. It's our sacred ritual. Every Christmas Eve, after celebrating with my family, Catherine and I slip away at midnight, embarking on our 2-hour pilgrimage through the sleeping heartland of Ohio to reach her family by dawn. There's something magical about those deserted back roads. No highways, no traffic lights, just endless fields and scattered farmhouses, all blanketed under the gentle weight of winter darkness. It feels like crossing into another dimension, one where only we exist, where time slows to accommodate our whispered conversations and shared laughter. The tradition began 3 years ago, when we first met as freshmen at Stanford. 2 Midwestern transplants who found each other among California's golden children. We were drawn together like magnetic poles, our shared geography creating an immediate bond that transcended mere coincidence. It felt preordained, as if the universe had conspicuously arranged our meeting. Our tradition isn't about the destinations, not really. It's about those precious hours in between, sealed within our mobile cocoon, music pulsing through speakers as we belt out lyrics with reckless abandonment. It's our private celebration, more intimate than any exchange of gifts could ever be. This year, everything started perfectly. Snow fell in delicate flurries, transforming the landscape into something from a forgotten fairy tale. Catherine's cheeks were flushed with happiness, her eyes reflecting the dashboard lights as we pulled away from my family's driveway. The heater hummed, the music played, and all felt right in our world. Until my phone rang. The shrill interruption sliced through our sanctuary. Lee. Out of place, in our carefully constructed moment. Unknown number. I rejected it without a second thought, making some offhand joke about dedicated scammers working through the holidays. Catherine laughed, I laughed, and we slipped back into our bubble. Then it rang again. Another unknown number. An irritation began to form, small but persistent, like a stone in my shoe. I let it go to voicemail. The third call came barely 2 minutes later. Something about that persistence, that violation of our sacred time, ignited a disproportionate anger within me. I snatched the phone from its cradle, my movements sharp and aggressive, startling Catherine beside me. I barked a hostile greeting into the receiver, expecting the robotic beginnings of a scripted scam. Instead, silence. Not complete silence, but the kind that carries weight. Static-laden, breathing silence that makes the hairs on your arms stand at attention. I was about to end the call when a voice materialized from that static void. A man's voice, unnervingly calm, unnaturally familiar. "Hello, Luke." Two simple words that sent ice water cascading down my spine. My name in a stranger's mouth. Intimate. Knowing. Wrong. Before I could respond, he continued, his voice maintaining that conversational tone that made everything so much worse. He recited details about my life. Not just surface information that could be gleaned from social media, but intimate knowledge. Things no stranger should know. Could know. My body's response was visceral, a full system rebellion against what I was hearing. That crawling, itching sensation spreading across my skin like wildfire. My mind raced to make connections, to find some explanation that wouldn't leave me feeling so utterly violated. When I finally found my voice, I asked what he wanted, struggling to maintain composure while my insides twisted with dread. His response was delivered with such casual cruelty that it momentarily robbed me of breath. "I'm not here for you, Luke. I'm here for Catherine." The sound of her name in his mouth was obscene, a desecration. Catherine's face beside me transformed, color draining away, leaving behind a mask of pure, undiluted terror. I lied instinctively, claiming I knew no Catherine, that he had the wrong number. He laughed. Not loudly, not maniacally, but with quiet certainty that was somehow infinitely worse. "She's sitting right next to you." My hands trembled so violently I could no longer trust them on the wheel. I pulled over, tires crunching on snow-covered gravel, engine idling in the vast midnight emptiness. Before I could say another word, Catherine reached over with startling swiftness and ended the call. I turned to her, questions exploding from me like shrapnel. Why had she done that? Why had she severed our only link to understanding what was happening? Her eyes, wide and glassy with fear, offered no answers. I tried calling back, once, twice, 3 times, each attempt leading nowhere, as if the number had never existed. Catherine urged me to keep driving, her voice thin and fragile. And I did. But the silence that had once been our comfort now stretched between us like a vast, unbridgeable chasm. As we drove through the darkness, new suspicions began to take root in my mind, sprouting from seeds of doubt that had been planted throughout our relationship. Little inconsistencies in her stories. Small moments when her truths didn't quite align. The speed with which she'd ended that call. The tears that now streaked her face. Were they from fear of the stranger, or fear of what he might reveal? We arrived at her family's home as dawn broke, neither of us having spoken for the remainder of the journey. The traditional joy of our midnight drive had been corrupted, perhaps irreparably. It's been a month since that night. I've questioned family members, friends, anyone who might have orchestrated such an elaborate prank. Nothing. Catherine maintains her innocence, her ignorance, but something fundamental has shifted between us. Trust, once broken, leaves jagged edges that cut whenever you try to piece it back together. I jump at every ring, every notification. Sleep comes in fitful bursts, easily shattered by the phantom sound of my phone. Because deep down, beneath the rational explanations and reassurances, I know one thing with absolute certainty. He will call again. And next time, I'll be alone when he does.